All right. Hello, everybody. I think I've got this all operating well. Let me just make some, there we go. Perfect. All right. How's it going, everyone? My name's Dan Abbate. I am an entrepreneur and I solve problems. That's what I do. I've been doing that my whole career. I'm really excited to be a part of AO. Um, I I'm really excited to get to meet all of you guys at different times, whether it's virtually like this, one on one, in person, hopefully one day. I think that's going to be cool. We can all kind of get back to that. And so, yeah, let's just get started right away. That'll be good. So, a little bit about me first. I've got my notes over here if you guys can't tell. A little bit about me first. So, just kind of my story, real quick. So, I grew up in manufacturing. My dad was in manufacturing. His dad was in manufacturing. So, when I was 14 years old, I was, running around the plant and learning and meeting and kind of just getting into the whole swing of things with business. I was also into computers at that time, and because manufacturing, especially my dad's place, was like a really old school kind of place. And so nobody knew anything about computers, but I did, 14, 15 years old. Um, and I helped them in their, ISO 9002 integrations and things like that, and kind of implemented an entire kind of network computer system into the business, which really helped me kind of get to learn process stuff. Like I saw the power of process from that manufacturing perspective. Um, and I also was able to see the power of computers and automation and kind of how all that stuff fits together. And then a little bit later, when I was in college, I went to college kind of early. So while I was in college in the late '90s, or rather mid '90s, um, I got I started a website, which then kind of blew up into a much larger thing, which I was selling to dot coms. And then we did that for about 18 months. And then those selling to dot coms, eventually dot com came and bought me, which was awesome. So I got to kind of feel that whole experience. Um, and then from essentially, 2000-ish, I'm really big into like, I love academia. I love studying. I'm a philosopher by trade, I guess you could say. I went to school for philosophy and business. I'm still doing a lot of philosophy stuff and some finance stuff on the academic side now. Um, and so then basically between 2003 and 2013, I acquired 8 different companies, which I improved and then sold, and then of course was making various investments and things like that all along the way as well. So um, I love process and I love systems. Like I'm a very systems focused person. So you'll notice that as I go through and I answer these questions, um, I'll probably always be coming back to systems and processes and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so that's it. That's the update. I'm super excited to be here, and let's get rolling. All right, so I'll just jump right into it, and let's go. So I've got it up here on my screen. Let's see here. All right. So first question comes from Gabrielle Suarez. I want to buy out a minority partner at one of the stores. We are bumping heads too much, and the 20% he owns of one store is the only thing tying him to me and the company. To cut him loose, I need to buy him out. What are some things I should look at when I negotiate this, and what are some things I can do to minimize my expense and protect myself from a legal perspective? Okay, so my first question back to you would be, do you have an operating or partner agreement or something like that? Because generally speaking, when you have a partner that owns equity, it's the operating agreement or partnership agreement or whatever it is that kind of dictates what has to happen in order for one person to be bought out. It also dictates who's in control, who really has the controlling interest and all that sort of stuff. Because just because you're the majority owner doesn't necessarily mean you have control, although by default that's generally what it means. So if I'm assuming that you don't have a partner agreement or an operating agreement that will solve the problem, So then that puts you in a position of trying to decide, you're kind of in two spots. You're kind of negotiating, and you're also dealing with some business valuation stuff. So let's start with the business valuation stuff. So if you are going to buy him out, what you'll have to do is you'll have to establish, or like, okay, so there's two ways to look at this, right? I don't know how sophisticated this person is. If the person's relatively sophisticated, they're going to want to know what the value of the business is, and they're going to want, if they're going to consider it all, they're going to want 20% of the value of the business. If they're not sophisticated, then you can offer them anything and try to just, negotiate your way out of it. But assuming that there's some sophistication there and you're going to have to do a valuation, that's not super hard to do. I mean, I'm assuming that the business isn't large enough that you'd have to pull in like a third party valuation type situation. So really all you would do is you would take your generally speaking, you take your cash flow. So like cash flow after, I would argue this because of where you're coming from, cash flow after what you're paying yourself to run the business as the manager. So for example, if your business is doing $1 million in revenue and you are the manager, a fair fee to be the manager is $100,000 a year. And then above that $100,000 a year, you're also making $100,000 in profit, like free cash flow. So you paid all your people, you paid yourself, and you're still making $100,000 on top of that. Generally speaking, in businesses of that size, you would just apply a multiple of 2 or 3, maybe 4, depending on what industry you're in, but just pick 3 for argument's sake. So you would say 3 times that free cash flow of $100,000 gets you to $300,000. And so that would mean that this person's 20% stake would be worth $60,000. So if you were just kind of running through the numbers like that, then that's how you would do it. You would just do that calculation. You'd say, hey, look, the business is worth $300,000. You own 20% of it. I want to pay you $60,000 to get out of it. Now, there's a couple nuances here which I think are important to mention from your question. The first thing that jumps to mind is that ownership and working in the business are 2 completely different things. So and I think this is important for people to recognize even for themselves because they don't. I think I bring it up and I reviewed the questions ahead of time. I think this comes up later, but you have to be aware of your own time. A lot of times in smaller businesses, especially in startups or even businesses that just remain small, people don't take into account their own time as if they were an employee. Because at the end of the day, you're just an employee like everybody else. So you need to calculate, if you spend 40 hours in the business, give yourself payroll, even if you don't actually give yourself payroll for tax purposes or whatever, but give yourself a line item that says what you're worth to the business from a dollars and cents perspective. If you do that, you can get a more realistic picture of what your business profits or doesn't profit. Because, for example, if you not taking yourself into account makes it so that the business shows a profit, but if you do take yourself into account, then the business is not showing a profit, then that would mean you'd be better off working for somebody else and then just having them pay you because your own business can't afford to pay you. So it kind of gives you some perspective on where you're at. But so the same thing applies in this particular case. Ownership and working are 2 different things. So because the guy works in the business now and you don't want him in the business anymore, if you have the authority to just fire him and move him out, you can do that. Like, it doesn't matter that he owns 20% of the business. He would just own 20% of the business and just wouldn't work there anymore. Like sometimes in the early stages when we give away equity, I'm assuming that was maybe the reason for doing this. In the early stages when we give away equity, the issue ends up being that, in those, everybody's super happy because we're excited and we're moving along and the business is going to be a great thing. And then we get into it and then the reality sets in of all the difficulties and that one partner works more than the other and all these different things. But at the end of the day, the 20% ownership that was given, theoretically was the same as cash. So you can't go back and say, oh, I want that cash that I, gave you 2 years ago. It's kind of the same thing with the equity, but you can still fire them or you can still move them out, as you say. So yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Happy to connect on this one-on-one to kind of go into more of the details, because I'm sure there's a lot more if I could ask questions that we can get into. I just want to make note of, one other strategy that you could potentially employ here is, and I don't know what the relationship is, and I don't know what the current dynamic is, but something that I jumped to mind was using the fact that he is an owner kind of back the other way. So you would say like, hey, you're focusing as the equity owner only on the upside, but right now everybody's gone through some pretty hard, business times right now. And there's a lot of risk involved in what we're doing right now. And I want you as an owner to help me with that risk. I want you to help me, get a loan. Or I want you to help me, cover the lease. I want you to, help me. I want you to cover 20% of that stuff with me. Start to ask those sorts of questions. Start to put your requests of, of the risk side of the equity ownership on him. And then from that conversation, he might get, tell him you want him to be a real owner and participate in the downside as much as the upside. And probably he won't want to do that, in which case then when you get around to the like, well, let me just buy you out, he might accept something more reasonable because of that. And then from a future perspective for anybody who's considering giving stock to employees or anything like that, I would recommend phantom stock or phantom equity over actual equity, just because it gives the person issuing it a little bit more control, because it's a contract versus actual equity ownership. And in that contract, you can specify all sorts of things that make it a lot easier for you to move around and get things, make things the way that you want them to be, as opposed to all the, when somebody owns actual equity, the rules that they're governed by are, legal rules by the state and everything. You can't really make them up. They are what they are, outside of agreeing to an operating agreement or partnership agreement, something like that. So anyway, I know I threw a lot at you on that. But yeah, happy to connect and talk about any of that stuff. Oh, you'll also notice that I'm going to recommend books. I think I'm going to make that my thing, because a book always jumps to mind in any particular situation. Because people are so smart in the world, and we might as well take advantage of all these people that put their stuff out in books and videos and all these sorts of things. So I want to recommend for this, Getting to Yes, which is a book by a guy named last name Fisher and another guy named Uri, U-R-Y. Getting to Yes is the book. It's all about negotiation and getting to yes, getting to an agreement. So that's a great place if you think this is going to be a hardcore negotiation, as opposed to some, hey, here's $1,000, go away. That might be helpful. Okay, that is that one. Let's move on here. All right. Allison Koyanagi. Do you have any resources or any advice on how to sell my services at a higher fee than what I sell it for now? I want to be able to convince potential clients that they will receive value for the investment they make with me, but I am having trouble with feeling confident enough to price my services higher. This is a great question. Very interesting question, because there's a lot going on here. Thank you, Allison. So here's what's going on. In economics, there's two terms that I think are important here and applicable. One is adverse selection, and the other is market signaling, and that's what you're asking about. You're asking about adverse selection and market signaling. So let me go into this real quick. So adverse selection basically means that one party has more information than another party. And then market signaling says that we have to signal the market to let them know that we're being truthful in the information that we're providing to them. So that's essentially what you're asking. You're basically saying, how do I sell my services at a higher fee than what I sell now? How do I let people know, use in your own words, how do I convince potential clients that they will receive value for the investment that they make? So you have to be able to convince them of that. So how do you do that? Well, in kind of the adverse selection conversation in economics and market signaling, one key way to do this is that's why people offer guarantees, right? So businesses offer guarantees because the only way that you'd be able to offer a guarantee is if you were very confident in the quality of what you were doing and that the person is going to get value from what you do. And because you signal the market essentially that you're able to do what you say you're going to do because you're putting your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. And then the providers that would do that without being able to deliver would go out of business because they wouldn't be able to service the guarantee. So that's so that's kind of one thing. If you can think in terms of guarantees, if you can think in ways where you prove your value first. My next question back to you is, will they receive value? Do you know that they'll receive value? I purposely didn't check out your website ahead of time because I didn't want to get any preconceived notions about it. But I do see that your email address is a marketing type email address. Marketing is tough because marketing, there's a lot of potential, not potential, like 99% of the time, especially with outside service providers, where there's a lot of ambiguity of, is this really delivering value to me or not? The provider always says that it does, but is it really providing value to me? So let me share a story. A friend of mine had a digital marketing company, managed Facebook, pay-per-click, brand building, all that sort of stuff. Like there's a lot of those. And he was running into the same exact problem. He was running into the same problem. How do you differentiate yourself? How do you grow your business? How do you charge a higher price? All that sort of stuff. And what he did, which I would recommend that anybody in any sales position where they're trying to convince their clients that they're valuable, make sure that your business process can prove that you're valuable. So, for example, in my friend's case, he went after a specific niche that he knew that he could tie his production process into their point of sale, so that basically he could track the work that he does on the marketing side all the way through the point of sale. So what that allows him to do in real time is to have a dashboard available all the time to the client without talking to him. They can click in there, click on it, see the activity, and then see the ROI in real time. So from his perspective, when he's talking to a potential client about what he does, he just says to him, like, look, we're both seeing the same information. I know as the service provider, am I providing you value and what that number is? And then the client knows, yeah, if I'm paying you $2,000 a month and you're generating me $6,000 a month or $8,000 a month, why wouldn't I pay you $2,000 a month? So I think that's from a technical perspective, that's where you have to get to. Maybe it doesn't have to be that technology focused, but I mean, like you've got to get, at least in your own mind, you've got to get clear on how you drive value. And it's not good enough to just say, well, I take this work away from someone. Like otherwise they'd be doing it in-house, and this way they don't have to do it. Because frankly, businesses that do a lot of stuff in-house isn't profitable. They're doing work that they shouldn't be doing, or that they're not doing it right. And so they're really just spending payroll hours on stuff that isn't profitable. That goes back to my kind of process high horse, I guess you could say, is that you have to look at every system and every process within your business as if it's an investment, because it is. Just because it's your time or your employee's time or something like that doesn't mean it's free. It's actually costing you money to have that person be inefficient. My whole acquisition strategy was finding companies that had just really crappy processes where there's just tons of inefficiency. So we would buy a company that maybe is doing $1 million in cash flow, and we would look at it and I'd say, I can pull another $1 million out just from inefficiency. So just by doing that, you double the size, you double the value of the business, you double the cash flow, you double the value of the business, and then sometimes jump it up to the next multiple, in which case you're more than doubling the business. So it's the same thing here. You've got to be able to track your value. Yeah, I think that's where I would leave that. And then the other part of it, the last part of your question, but I'm having trouble feeling confident enough to price my services higher. The confident part of it, I want to recommend a book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. It's a great book. It's all about kind of like the mental blocks that we put in ourselves. Like we know where our level of comfort is, like kind of psychologically, and how do we push past that? How do we be how do we become more confident or confident at all that that could be a reality for us? How can we break past these blocks? So it's called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And so I would also consider that, because the way you phrase that, it sounds like there's also, aside from a technical issue going on, there might be some some internal blocks that you might have to deal with as well. Don't underestimate the power of your own perspective. What you see is what there is. That's it. And so if all you're seeing is this block, you're not going to be able to see past it. Another great book that comes to mind is Think Fast and Slow. A great book all about like the way that the brain works and the way we operate. Think Fast and Slow, also great. So thanks for your question. Let's keep moving here. Kristen Lattis. As a copywriter, what is the best way to scale my business? I currently write for online coaches who can only afford up to $3,000 with me, and very few invest in someone else to write for them. If I want to make more in the future, is it about increasing prices or about switching my niche to bigger businesses that can afford me and see the value in copy? P.S. I write everything myself, and in the future, I would love to work with a copy editor and another writer so I can take on more projects. All right. Also a very juicy question. Let's see, where do I want to begin on this one? All right. So from a business perspective, kind of overall, there's two parts to your business, because I'm making the assumption that your copywriting model is recurring, like meaning you're doing it on a month-to-month basis and they're paying you a monthly fee, something like that. You're probably not writing onesie twosies. Ideally, if you are writing onesie twosies, you should definitely switch your mindset to a reoccurring revenue model. That'll just make your life a lot easier. So there's two parts to a recurring revenue model. There's your sales process and your production process. And this, so your sales process, which is what you're kind of asking about, I suppose, because you're saying, how do I get my price up? How do I get my, how do I find more customers? All that sort of stuff. So you're going to have to really look at your sales process first. And you're on the right track when you're saying, do I change the niche that I'm looking at? You're also, I want to caution you a little bit too, that you're making some assumptions about, if it's really true that these coaches can only afford up to $3,000. I don't know where you came up with that number. Like, that's another thing too. When you do your research, that might just be an assumption, that number that you came up with. That or like you're saying, you might be just talking to the wrong people. There might be another group that you can talk to better. But anyway, so when you do your sales process, the thing with sales and marketing, just like any other process, is it's a system. It has to be measured. It has to be repeatable. It has to be something that you're able to go out into the world in a knowing way and get a result. Now, to get to that is very tricky, because there's a lot of experimenting. And when you're experimenting, what do? Well, you make a hypothesis, you do your experiment, you collect your data, and then you revise your hypothesis and start again, right? So that's kind of like using that experimental method. That's what you're going to have to do on your sales process side. You're going to have to answer these questions, not through, me just throwing it out there, but you'll have to answer them through the work of doing that process, of doing kind of the experimental sales process to figure it out. Because you need to know two things. You need to know your customer acquisition cost, and the lifetime value of your customer. Once you know those two things, because if it costs you $300 to acquire a customer, but the lifetime value of your client is $3,000, perfect. I'll invest in that all day long, right? So, easy. $300 to get $3,000, that goes back to that same value perspective that we were talking about at the question before, is that you want to get yourself in a position, both in your own business and the value that you provide to others, that it's clear that I am going to invest $1 and I'm going to get $5 back. You want that situation playing out over and over and over again, throughout your internal processes as well as your outside, business, the service that you provide. So, so on the sales side, that's what you would be doing. You'd be doing that kind of experimental process on the sales side to figure out who your niche market is, and to figure out, what you can charge them. You could, you're saying that it's only $3,000. I don't, like, just to give you an example, one of the businesses that, I own and I'm invested in is a grant writing business. It started out just the same as what you're saying, one person doing grant writing for people in a freelance capacity. And we built a sales process that sells nationally and clients nationally, and then a production process, which is the other part of your question, so that we can, we can produce the content, we can pay for our GSA, which is the general selling and administrative, and we can make a 20% profit, all as a company, as a system. And so, like, in that particular case, when we first started, this person was charging, we basically increased the price 5x from where she was originally, because we added more value. We added, we got clear on who our clients were. We got clear on, what we did. And so our price is 5 times higher than what it used to be. And it had to be 5 times higher, right? Because if you want to be freelance, just working as a one-person show, that's totally fine. Just keep squeaking up your hourly rate until you get it to where you want it to be. But if you want to run a business with a sales department and a production department and a 20% profit margin and, and payroll that includes you as a person who works and as also profit as an owner, if you want all that stuff, you have to break it down into systems. So I think I might just leave it at that. It can be done, but you have to break it down. You have to look at it in pieces and then do the steps to put the process in place. A book that I would recommend for this is Automatic Customer, John Warrillow. A great book about subscription type businesses, businesses that have recurring revenue. I would recommend it to anybody, even if your business isn't a subscription type business. I would say figure out how to make it a subscription type business, because if you want to eventually exit your business, reoccurring revenue is super valuable, way more valuable than just onesie twosies, like infinitely more valuable. And then all this process stuff that we're talking about, getting all these things in place and knowing your numbers and being able to repeat your numbers adds tremendous value to the business. Makes it maybe sometimes the difference between being able to sell it and never being able to sell it. And I'd also recommend everyone, the Harvard Business Review does a fantastic job of presenting information that's, kind of academic and dense and like research type stuff into like articles that are readable and usable. And when you have a question like any of these questions that you're asking, go to the Harvard Business Review, search for pricing or something like that. For example, there was an article not too long ago that talked about they did research into how much you can increase your prices before anybody cares. And they actually found that you could raise them 8% on average, with no adverse effects, really. People don't even pay attention to 8%. So when you're trying to raise your prices, start there. Just raise it up 8%, and then and then you can, anything beyond that, you'll have to add more value. You'll have to do things, but that's that. So don't be shy to spend money on these things either. We're all into buying books. We're all into doing all these things. These online Harvard Business Review, Financial Times, any of the, Bloomberg, whatever you find, all these things that do cost money. I know there's like on the internet, there's this idea that you get everything for free, but you kind of get what you pay for. Some of the better quality publications, you can buy them monthly. So just pay for it for 1 month, and if you don't like it anymore, like or you're not using it, just do something else, like cancel it and buy another one. Okay, so then my next question comes from Edward Morgan. All right, here we go. I only have a basic understanding of blockchain, so I would like to know how it could best be implemented to improve the operations of a Shopify-based e-commerce business like the two that I run. My business is New Zealand-based with a largely domestic customer base, and my supplies come from China and Belgium. I run B2B and B2C business models, and I'm essentially a middleman. Thanks. All right, Edward. So I know a bit about blockchain. I've been involved in this space now for a while, and I think my maybe overview I would give to anyone who is not as familiar with blockchain or whatever is that blockchain is about trust, and then independently verified trust without a third party. So like the reason that our institutions exist, like say banks, for example, for like international trade, like what we're describing here, the reason that we have banks in the middle of our transactions internationally, for example, is because we don't trust the person on the other side. We have no way of verifying that that person is who they are, or that they're going to pay us or anything like that. So we have these institutions which are very big and theoretically are trustworthy, and I give them my money, and then I wait to receive parts, and then the bank passes it to their bank, and then that bank passes it to the guy on the other side. So there's a fee associated with all that, and that's how banks exist. So blockchain essentially takes that out of the middle. So when you're trying to make a transaction utilizing blockchain as the mode of trust, it works super well in a digital environment, which is why all the currencies, the cryptocurrencies exist, because it works really, really well in that capacity when it's 100% digital and online. The tricky part comes is that there's a lot of conversation about taking it into the real world. The difficulty with it is that you have to have, well, there's a lot of difficulties, but one in particular is you have to have a critical mass of people using it in order for it to be valuable. It's a network effect issue, right? So the more people that use it, the more valuable it is. And then there's the catch-22 of when does it become valuable? When are there enough people using it that I want to use it? Well, then no one ever makes that decision because it doesn't ever reach that critical mass. So like in your case, I think you're running into kind of like the primary problem with blockchain and its rollout in general, not just as it relates to your business, but it's how do you utilize it? Because if your suppliers aren't set up to utilize it within, like, say, their ERP systems, and that sort of stuff, like where, like, or it has to follow the chain, like the literal shipping to the supply chain. The supply chain has to literally have the blockchain components built into its processes all the way through for blockchain to be useful. And at this point, that generally doesn't exist in the real world. And even when it does exist, some of the technical challenges with that are, for example, I said that the digital side makes it easier because it never leaves the internet, essentially. But as soon as you take it offline, like let's say you're going to ship a pallet of something and we're going to use blockchain to verify that it's the same pallet and blah, 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 blah. The blockchain is only as useful as the integrity of however you're identifying the pallet. So if the pallet moved from one shipper to another shipper, and then something gets on the, like, literally the tag, the physical tag, which is being used to kind of track it on the blockchain, gets corrupted or something like that, then it doesn't work. So there's a lot of challenges that have to be overcome with that. So to answer your question about that, you're talking about something that is a lot of people are trying to work on to figure out how to make blockchain useful for themselves and for kind of the industries at large. and that hasn't happened yet. We've seen it again in finance, but that's because it's all electronic, it's all digital. But we haven't seen a lot of that in the real world yet. But it's something to think about, and it's something to work on, because maybe your business right now is what you're doing, but perhaps solving. I mean, lots of gigantic businesses have come out of people solving a problem that they had in their own business, and then the problem they solved actually becomes the business. I think Twitter was a great example of that. Twitter was just a thing that they were using themselves, or was it? It was either it was Twitter or Slack, or maybe both of them. I don't remember. It was one of those two. Was about they built something that they use themselves in their own office, and then that turned into their actual product. So anyway, I would look at that. My recommendation for this one is Blockchain Revolution, for a book. It's written by a father-son team. Their last name is Tapscott. Blockchain Revolution, great book on blockchain and kind of where it can go, where it's going, some of the hurdles that it has to overcome in order to become useful. So I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better answer on that one, but happy to talk about it. Obviously, I'm super passionate about it. All right, Deanna Markle. I am a licensed aesthetic laser specialist, and I have 5 others working for me in my clinic, including a clinic manager. I want to stop working so much on patients and start working on things that will grow the business, and I need to delegate as much as I can to my clinic manager. I'm looking for ideas on how I can put together a list of all the things I want her to do and how to make sure she can report back to me on a daily or weekly basis. How did you put together a list of things you wanted someone like that to handle for you, and how do they keep you up to date? Do you use software, meetings, emails? I'm open to all ideas. Thanks. Cool. Let me make another note here because I want to get to this later. Okay, cool. So again, a great question. Lots to unpack. All right, so first thing, I love that you're saying you want to stop working so much on patients. That's the exact right thing to be thinking at this point. You've got a team, you have a clinic manager. You should be able to work on the patients that you choose to work on, and no more than the ones you choose to work on. And if you chose to never work on patients again, you're a business owner. You don't need to work on patients anymore if you don't want to. This goes back to that comment that I made up above where we talked about valuing your own time. I don't know if you're doing this or not, but I was advising a acupuncture, Eastern medicine facility practice, and they were in the exact same boat. The 2 owners were practitioners initially. The business grew very quickly. They were doing a lot of they were doing all the business stuff, and then they were also doing the patients, right? They were like doing the work with the patients, which they loved, of course, but now they had 2 jobs. One job that they didn't get paid for, because now as practitioners, they were billing the client, of course, for the business, but they weren't billing for their own personal time. So all the other practitioners were getting paid for the work they did, but the owners were not getting paid for the work they did. That just rolled into profit on the business, which of course, from what I said earlier, is distorting the profit on the business, because essentially their own time, which should be paid for the work that they did as practitioners, was now being lumped into the profit. So it was not accurate, the profit numbers that they were showing. And then as you're also suggesting, the other issue there is that there was less time to be able to work on the business. You've probably heard of the thing, the on the business, in the business, right? So when you're working in the business, you're just doing the operational work in the business like an employee. You're just doing employee type work when you're working in the business. When you're working on the business, now you're one level up. You're controlling the systems of the business. You're managing the business structure. That's what you want to be working on all the time. As much as possible, you want to work on the business structure. You want to get to that working on the business as much as possible. So how do you do that? You asked that question. Probably should answer it. You have a clinic manager. one by one, take a process that you're doing. Okay, so first there's yeah, let me do it in this order. Take a process that you're doing one by one. Don't hand it all off at once. It doesn't have to happen overnight. One thing, something easy, so you can have a win between you and the manager, right? One simple win. Hand it off to the person. If you and then also at this point take the opportunity to create the training documentation if it if that's probably necessary, and you can do that if whatever's easiest for you. You can write it up, outline the process, bullet point it out, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then that produces the outcome. You can also, I like Loom. Loom is great. If you guys haven't used Loom, great way to if what you're showing a lot of times is on your browser, you can record in real, and just show people how to do it. And now you've got a great video that you can teach them how to do something. And then you also then have it for archival purposes. When you want to train the next person, you can just give them those batch of videos. A lot of times people like learning from videos versus reading. I do, versus reading, bullet points of stuff. So anyway, pick one process, document the process either by, keyboard or by video. Hand it off to the manager. Make sure that in your process, you have a clear way in which you monitor the success of the process on a regular basis. So you'll have to establish some sort of KPI for the process. What's the key point indicator that says, hey, this was done? Depending on what it is, it will be different. And then that's it. And then just repeat until you've handed everything over to your manager, or the manager can't do it. And then you have to question, well, is it the manager or is it the processes that I'm giving to them? The other thing I think you'll find too is that when you do it process by process like that, you're going to maybe start to find the inefficiencies. You should be looking for the inefficiencies, because in those inefficiencies, again, there's money. If you give your manager a process, let's say you're paying your manager $20 an hour, and you give your manager a process, and it takes them an hour a week to complete that process. 20 times 4 weeks, let's say, it's costing you $80 a month. $80 a month times 12 is almost $1,000 a year. So that process cost you $1,000 a year to execute. So if you didn't have that process anymore, if you can eliminate that through efficiency, then you just made $1,000. You put $1,000 in your pocket at the end of the year. Now imagine that over a whole bunch of processes or things that cost more than 1 hour a week, and you can see that things really start to add up. So as far as kind of the tactical side of your question, so I think process mapping is also helpful. If you guys haven't done anything, if you haven't really gotten familiar with process mapping, do a quick search, watch a video about it or something like that. Because process mapping gives you a visual of what your process looks like and kind of how all the decisions are made. And then if this happens, go to this process. And if that happens, go to that process step. And it kind of like zigzags like that till it gets to the end. You can really start to spot inefficiencies. And if you can put that in your brain, that's kind of how you're thinking about your business, how you're thinking about processes, then that's a great way to kind of intellectually get your mind. Make sure that you have KPIs that can measure the performance. So in your particular case, as you're getting this manager up to speed, you've got to have those KPIs. And then also one thing I would recommend is, if at all possible, which it's always possible, it just takes more or less work, make it so that your KPIs and the way that you track people is not disturbing of the activity. So I see what happens as companies grow and they start to do this stuff. They end up creating a lot of extra work when it comes to reporting and like meetings and all that stuff. Because again, remember, all that costs money, right? Reporting would be a process, and then process costs money. Meetings cost money because it's time. So I would be very careful when you're setting these things up. if there's any opportunities for you to be able to track the activities without the person having to report to you, that's a win. Everything that I do when I'm looking at it is I'm always thinking, how does the way that the person does their job also report information to me without being two separate things? So I would recommend kind of keeping that in the back of your head as well. Yeah, because that's just, that's all money, that's all efficiency. You can go from there. Oh, the other thing I want to mention is I'm a big automation person. I've been, like I mentioned earlier, I've been automating things my entire career. Get it wrong before you automate it. Don't immediately jump to automation. Don't immediately jump to software solutions. There's so many SaaS platforms that you can just sign up for a SaaS platform. Great, we're going to do this SaaS platform. You're going to spend so much time trying to figure out how the SaaS platform works when you could actually just start simply with, here's a process, use a Google Sheet or something simple like that. Okay, here's how we're going to track the process. You be sparing in the way that you immediately jump into the software solutions, because the other problem with software solutions are, once you commit to them and you really get deep with them, it's very hard to change. And so if your process wasn't great to begin with and now you've integrated it into this system too early, you're stuck with some of the inefficiencies that you've essentially committed to within the software system. But that said, there are some great software SaaS products out there. Suite Process is one. Trainial is another. There's tons of them where it helps keep your processes organized and managed within your business, almost like a table of contents, so you can keep track of all the different content that you create in order to manage these processes. But like I said, don't be shy about being very manual about it, because the more manual you are in the early stages, the more you can tweak and change and get it more and more efficient. You might start out with 20 steps, and by the time you've run through it a bunch of times, maybe you're down to 10, or maybe you're down to 6, or maybe you merge it with another process, so you want to have the flexibility to do that. Okay, so another great way when it comes to management and accountability is a book that I want to recommend to you is Traction by Wickman. I don't know what's his first name. I don't remember. But Traction, it's about the Entrepreneur Operating System, EOS, and it's all about accountability, and it's all about how to run a meeting that's effective for your team to make sure that you guys are staying connected and staying on top of everything. It's a very regimented format that lots of companies have implemented, and very successfully. It's a great system. So I recommend Traction by Andrew Wickman, whatever, his last name's Wickman. And then the last thing that I want to leave you guys with, which again, you're going to hear this from me a lot as we talk about things, is my number one, I moved to Florida to explore and learn business as kind of an intellectual pursuit, and then to be able to apply that intellectual pursuit, be able to apply it into my businesses, to other people's businesses, and to scale what I was doing. That's all I did literally from 2013 till about 2016. So it took about 3 years where I didn't do any other work other than learning and meeting with people and talking to people, and it's been it was a great experience to do that. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that from kind of a financial perspective and a time perspective, and which gave me so much opportunity to do all the things I'm doing now. But there was one concept which, out of all the things that I'm going to talk about with you guys over time, and that I love and that I share and that I think is so great, but there was one concept in particular that was the concept which kind of merged the intellectual, philosophical, and productive kind of business concept into one thing, and that's the theory of constraints. Anybody that knows me knows that I always quote the theory of constraints, and I always use that as kind of an anchoring point. The book that you would read about the theory of constraints is called The Goal. The guy who wrote its last name is Goldratt. Again, it's called The Goal. And the theory of constraints basically says that to maximize your output, you've got a process. And the goal isn't to increase the efficiency of any individual step in the process, but the goal is to manage the constraint, because somewhere in every process, and to maximize the outflow of your business, there's a constraint. That one thing that if you work on that and if you manage that, your output is going to go up, because that's the thing that's really holding you back. It's not inefficiencies in all these other steps. It's the constraint at this one particular point which holds you back. That goes back to that intellectual, emotional constraint, which I made reference to up above in relation to the big leap. That can be a constraint on someone. That could be the only constraint potentially. There could be more of a systems constraint, like your, or even better example, you're buying products from China and you're selling them online. You can, right now, for example, masks and vinyl gloves. The constraint is getting masks and vinyl gloves. If you're in the PPE business, your constraint is, if I got gloves, I can sell them. Anything else is not a constraint. I can get money to buy as many gloves as I can, but if I can't buy the gloves, I cannot grow the business. So that's the constraint in that particular case. So when you're talking about a production constraint, it doesn't change that much. Once you identify it, you'll be probably managing that production constraint for a long time. When you're talking about like a supply constraint, like I just said, or like a demand, things that are brought on because of demand changes, like, what I was just talking about with the vinyl gloves, or an intellectual thing, those things might change. You might come over, you might get over that hurdle, and then there'll be a new constraint that you have to pay attention to. But there'll always be just one. It'll come down to one. You'll start to work on one and you'll realize it's not that one, it's another one. So when you're thinking process and you're thinking systems, it's the constraint that's going to, where you're going to want to manage your focus. I'll leave it at that. Okay, I think that's it. Those were all my questions for this time. I hope you guys liked it. I had a good time, and I'm looking forward to doing more of these. And I am super available to people, so just reach out to me. If you do reach out to me on Facebook, sometimes a little slow on Facebook because I don't check it that much. Same thing with LinkedIn. Yeah, but reach out to me if you want to send through email. I'm always happy to talk with people. I'm even happy to get on a Zoom call or something and just introduce each other and find out what you're up to, because I love this stuff. Big companies, small companies, startups, mature companies. I love it. So that's why I do what I do. I guess that's it. Thanks very much, everybody. I will talk to you soon. Over and out.